Today, we're plunging into the profound urban struggle of the 2019-2020 Hong Kong protests. This was a movement that was, well, revolutionary in its methods.
Absolutely. Entirely decentralized in its structure and, deeply defined by the strategic repurposing of the most mundane, everyday objects.
And our sources for this deep dive, they really run the gamut from high-level academic theory on surveillance all the way to courtroom transcripts and detailed safety commentary.
And they paint a truly bizarre and compelling picture of an asymmetric struggle.
It really was a conflict fought not just with barricades and police shields, but with objects you might find in any classroom or hardware store right now.
Things like umbrellas, simple zip ties, and the focus of our paradox today, laser pointers.
So our mission for you, the listener, is really twofold. First, we need to understand the tactical genius behind this largely leaderless movement, the sheer fluidity of its response to state power.
And second, and this is maybe the more crucial part, we have to unpack the legal and philosophical logic that allowed the state to redefine these ordinary items.
These tools of defense or convenience.
Right, and turn them into highly scrutinized and criminal weapons.
That is the core of this deep dive. How did a basic, low-cost device designed for presentations or, maybe pointing out constellations,
How did that become the singular piece of evidence that resulted in a young person's conviction for possessing an offensive weapon?
it's a profound shift in legal definition. How are they weapons? That's only a flashlight. Okay, let's unpack this and trace the entire path from civilian tool to criminal evidence, starting with the political pressure cooker that ignited it all.
To really get why the protesters developed such adaptive anonymous tactics, we have to look at the political context that catalyzed this mass mobilization.
It all started with the proposed Fugitive Offenders Bill in 2019.
And the immediate catalyst for that bill was almost darkly ironic.
Yeah, it wasn't a political crime that sparked the whole crisis, but a really tragic individual one.
That's right. In 2018, a Hong Kong national, Chen Tong-kai, he murdered his girlfriend, Poon Hyo-wing, while they were visiting Taiwan as tourists.
He then fled back to Hong Kong and later confessed to the crime, but Hong Kong's judiciary couldn't try him for the murder itself.
Because the crime happened outside its jurisdiction.
Exactly.
Hong Kong lacked a formal extradition arrangement with Taiwan. And the situation was compounded by the political reality that the People's Republic of China, which controls Hong Kong's foreign affairs, it doesn't recognize Taiwan's sovereignty.
So there was this huge jurisdictional gap.
A huge gap. So to bridge it and allow Chan's transfer, the Hong Kong government proposed an amendment that would permit case-by-case transfers of fugitives.
And this is the key part. Approved by the chief executive to any jurisdiction lacking a formal treaty.
Any jurisdiction. And that right there is where the political threat crystallized for the citizens.
Because any jurisdiction included mainland China.
Precisely. This proposal was seen as a deliberate, massive loophole, effectively undermining the one country, two systems framework that was established during the 1997 handover from the UK.
And that framework was supposed to promise Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy, especially its independent judiciary and its common law system.
Which is fundamentally different from mainland China's legal structure, a state-controlled judiciary where rights like habeas corpus just aren't guaranteed.
So the bill wasn't just legal housekeeping?
Not at all. It was perceived as Beijing reaching across that promised judicial firewall to pull any person, a political dissident, a business person, a critic, into its legal black box. That existential threat is what drove the mass mobilization.
Okay, so given that level of perceived state interference and the threat of retaliation, the movement that emerged was, well, it had to be radically adaptive.
And it was. Unlike the 2014 umbrella movement, which had very visible, even iconic leaders who were easily targeted and arrested.
The 2019 protests were famously leaderless.
They operated as a truly decentralized network. They relied almost entirely on digital platforms to achieve this kind of collective, distributed intelligence.
And the main organizing platform was LIHKG, right?
Yes. LIHKG, which functions a lot like Reddit, it became the movement's operational nerve center.
It wasn't just a place for people to vent, though. The structure was actually critical to their consensus-building process.
That's it. Protesters used it for real-time brainstorming, proposing tactics, and then collectively voting on the best strategies and locations for action. This democratic, community-driven process allowed for rapid deployment without a central command structure.
Without a head for the police to cut off.
Exactly. And for operational security, to avoid digital surveillance of their planning, they relied heavily on Telegram and encrypted messaging service.
Because anonymity was everything.
It was paramount. Individuals needed to avoid not only state prosecution, but also retaliation from powerful mainland-aligned corporations and employers. The consequences of being identified went far beyond the courthouse.
And we saw doxing used by all sides, unfortunately.
Yes, to expose identities and leverage societal pressure. It was brutal.
That need for invisibility and resilience is what really brought the philosophy of be water to the forefront.
It's the perfect martial arts metaphor, drawn from Bruce Lee.
Be formless, shapeless.
Like water. The idea that you should be fluid and agile, adapting instantly to the container or the opponent. This meant the protesters deliberately rejected the stationary, fixed tactics of 2014.
So no more mass sit-ins and tent occupations.
No, because those were too easy for police to contain and disperse.
That sounds incredibly chaotic to coordinate, though. I mean, if you're leaderless and you're emphasizing fluidity, how did they make sure 20 different groups were acting cohesively without one person giving orders?
That's where the digital infrastructure and the core philosophy really intersected. Cohesion wasn't achieved through centralized orders,
but through decentralized knowledge.
And shared intent. They adopted flash mob tactics, moving swiftly, hitting targets, and retreating instantly when police arrived, only to reemerge minutes later in different, often distant locations.
So they could spread their footprint across the entire city.
20 different neighborhoods simultaneously, forcing the police to disperse their own forces and frustrating their ability to form large, effective containment lines.
So the state was basically fighting an opponent that was everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Which meant the counter strategy from the authorities then had to evolve beyond just simple crowd control.
Absolutely. The state shifted to what the philosopher Grégoire Chamayou calls the militarized manhunt.
And what does that mean, exactly?
If the enemy is defined by its ability to disappear, the state's primary objective shifts. The task is no longer brute mobilization or physical destruction.
It's to identify and locate the individual agents of dissent.
They needed to put names to the masked faces.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because this intense focus on identification fueled the entire counter-surveillance gear movement we're about to discuss.
The state was actively hunting for potential agents of dissent using digital tools.
And the evidence for this shift toward manhunting it's startling. Public records show that police request to local and foreign service providers for user information.
Supposedly for the prevention and detection of crime.
Right. Those requests surged by 55% compared to the previous year. That increase shows a strategic shift toward digital identification, locating suspects based on their online footprints and communication data.
And the threat wasn't just in physical raids or data pools, it was being manufactured in the digital sphere. We have to talk about that Chinese People's Liberation Army, the PLA propaganda video.
Yes. That 3-minute video, posted on social media, showcased these highly stylized anti-riot drills. It was a slick, high-production deterrent.
It looked like an action movie.
It did. It used action movie tropes, sweeping aerial drone footage, and crucially, it used local Cantonese dialects, making it hyper-local and highly threatening.
This belligerent simulation directly recalls the work of Jean Baudrillard on simulation and hyperreality.
It does. The conflict in this case wasn't measured solely by the actual clashes on the streets, but by its speculative unfolding in an abstract, electronic, and informational space.
So that PLA video was a virtualized, speculative unfolding of conflict.
Precisely. By demonstrating overwhelming, technologically superior force in a highly polished format, they were trying to create a preemptive atmosphere of fear and futility.
Trying to win the battle of wills before it even began.
Yes, using the threat of intervention to deter the protests before the confrontation even happened. And this existential dread forced the protesters to prioritize anonymity above almost everything else.
So the moment the state confirmed its strategy was one of identification and chemical dispersion, the protester uniform, full gear, it stopped being optional.
It became a necessity for survival. And it was a necessity built from civilian products. The standard attire was black clothing, goggles, hard hats, and face masks.
The symbolic power was immense. Yellow hard hats, for instance, they became a widespread, immediate visual identifier of the movement.
Signifying preparation and defense.
But the most crucial element, which really speaks volumes about the sheer scale of the police response, was the emphasis on chemical defense, respirators and high-grade air filters.
You have to stop and grasp the numbers here because they are staggering.
Yeah.
During the entire 2 months of the 2014 umbrella movement, Hong Kong police deployed 87 tear gas rounds.
87.
Compare that to 2019. Between June 9th and August 4th alone, a similar time frame, they fired over 1,000 rounds.
1,000 in just under 2 months.
Over 1,000 rounds across 3/4 of the city's districts.
That's over 10 times the volume in the same time frame. That's an operational change. It's moving from targeted dispersal to massive area saturation.
Absolutely. And this necessitated professional-grade protection. Demand for high-grade cartridge filters, specifically those designed to neutralize tear gas agents, like CS gas.
Oh, chlorobenzylidine malononitrile.
Yes, that. Demand depleted nearly all stock at 3M distributors in Hong Kong. The demand was so overwhelming it caused surges in nearby places like Taiwan. People were buying up filters to send back.
And the danger wasn't just the sheer quantity of the CS gas, which is toxic enough. It was the police's flagrant disregard for its safe deployment.
The reports regarding the misuse of tear gas are deeply concerning. CS gas is designed for open-air crowd control. We saw documented cases of police firing it into confined spaces.
The Keith Fong subway station incident was a major one.
It was egregious.
So explain the physics of that danger. When you use CS gas in a closed environment like a subway station, what are the specific consequences?
In a tightly confined area with limited ventilation, deploying that much tear gas dramatically increases the concentration, the level of exposure, and the inhalation quantity.
And this subjects not just protesters, but unsuspecting commuters.
Commuters who had no protective equipment at all. They're subjected to severe risks. We are talking about symptoms far beyond simple tearing and eye pain.
What kind of risks?
High concentration exposure leads to corneal injury, severe respiratory distress, potential chemical burns, and prolonged incapacitation. Firing into stations demonstrates either a profound ignorance or a willful disregard for the safe, lawful use of these chemical agents.
So the mask moved from being a protective option to an absolute necessity for survival. And beyond chemical defense, the mask served a profound strategic political function.
Identity concealment in a surveillance state.
Exactly. The mask became the ultimate symbol of resistance against the digital manhunt. It was critical for avoiding the surveillance gaze of cameras linked to facial recognition technology,
Which the Chinese government is known to deploy extensively to track, catalog, and control its citizens.
and this required protesters to get incredibly creative, treating the streets as a continuous field of potential surveillance.
Indeed. They employed low-tech but clever anti-surveillance tools. Protesters used mundane items like aluminum foil, certain reflective materials,
Even emergency thermal blankets.
yes, to obscure their heat signatures from thermal cameras and to flood or reflect camera images, deliberately disrupting the sensor data. They saw the city infrastructure itself as the enemy.
Which is why the smart lampposts became a literal point of conflict.
They did. New infrastructure that included these smart lampposts were physically dismantled by protesters. Their fear was that this centralized infrastructure was specifically designed for real-time tracking
Potentially with integrated facial scanning.
and automated detection capabilities. Dismantling them was an active physical rejection of that emerging surveillance architecture.
And then there's the humble umbrella, the symbol of the 2014 movement, which saw its tactical purpose multiply in 2018.
Oh, the umbrella's functions were so layered. Yes, it was a physical shield against water cannons, projectiles, tear gas canisters. It literally stopped incoming objects.
But its critically evolved role was in identity concealment.
That's it. When used en masse, or even by small groups, the canopy of the umbrella created a curtain, a temporary shield that obscured the identities of people performing actions. It was essential for defeating line-of-sight surveillance and frustrating facial recognition technology.
So if we synthesize this whole section, the state's goal was identification and deterrence through massive physical and digital force. And the uniform, the mask, the helmet, the umbrella, it was no longer just gear for self-protection.
It was armor against the state's digital manhunt and legal retribution.
As the police focused on capturing faces and identifying bodies, the protesters shifted the battle to the domain of information and light.
This is the ultimate, non-lethal application of countervisuality, fighting the gaze with tools designed specifically to interfere with observation.
And the undisputed star of this counter-visual toolkit was the laser pointer, an everyday item repurposed into a device the state would legally deem an offensive weapon.
It's a remarkable case study in low-cost technological adaptation. Protesters realized that high-powered handheld lasers, while harmless if not aimed directly at the eye, were extremely effective against electronic sensors.
So what was the precise tactical use? They weren't just causing general annoyance, were they?
Far from it. I mean, yes, they were used to distract and annoy police officers, forcing them to shield their eyes or temporarily blinding their ability to focus.
But their primary tactical role was focused on the surveillance infrastructure.
Exactly. They were aimed directly at police cameras, body-worn sensors, and any suspected facial recognition systems. By flooding the camera sensors with intense, concentrated light, they effectively rendered the image unusable,
Blocking the surveilling gaze.
and preserving anonymity for those behind the flash.
The public response to the police seizing these laser pointers and calling them weapons, it shows how the movement used irony to fight back. Tell us about the laser show.
It was a perfect piece of political theater. After one activist was arrested and the police held a press conference displaying his confiscated laser pointers, calling them highly dangerous.
Offensive weapons.
Right. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered outside the Hong Kong Space Museum.
A place literally dedicated to the viewing of light and stars. That irony is just perfect.
It is. They organized their own spontaneous laser show, mimicking the elaborate choreographed light show that the local tourism board puts on.
So they just pointed hundreds of laser beams into the sky.
Dancing with the light, turning the supposedly grave charge of carrying an offensive weapon into a public spectacle of dazzling, harmless frivolity. It successfully ridiculed the police's absurd overreach.
Beyond light, they weaponized data itself, turning the asymmetric information battle on its head. This leads us to HKmap.live.
HKmap.live was arguably the single most effective operational tool of the movement. It was a crowdsourced, digital blueprint of the city, accessible via a web browser and updated in real time.
And it was necessary because the police had this overwhelming information superiority, right, in terms of positioning and deployment.
They did. The app required intense coordination and verification. Teams of volunteer runners, often disguised as casual passers-by, would risk arrest to gather real-time intelligence
Sometimes just with pen and paper.
on police movements, blocked roads, hazard zones. This raw data was then fed to a central integrator team, which collated it with info from live stream feeds and news sources before updating the map.
And the map relied on a very specific, almost coded language to remain clean and effective.
Absolutely. To ensure speed and clarity, they relied on specific emojis and symbols. For instance, a small dog emoji meant general police forces,
A dinosaur meant the Special Tactical Squad.
the ones known for their aggressive tactics. And a white speech bubble specifically signified tear gas deployment, giving protesters advance warning of chemical attack zones.
This instantaneous data flow allowed the protesters to maintain their be water fluidity.
And this brings us back to Baudrillard and that idea of singulation that we touched on, the map preceding the territory.
So the map literally created the reality for the protesters.
In a way, yes. The enormous informational asymmetry meant the city, the real territory, was unpredictable. Protesters used HKmap.live to turn that complex reality into a manageable simulation. The real-time map dictated their movement.
Forcing them to melt down the solidity of the urban environment into a hyper-real terrain.
Exactly, where the digital representation dictated the physical movement. It became an instrument of resistance that defied the centralized maps held by state powers.
And the digital resistance wasn't just about street movement, it was about bypassing the informational firewall entirely.
Operational security demanded robust digital defenses. While LIHKG was used for consensus, they needed resilient communication channels. Telegram's usage surged tenfold in mid-2019, but it soon became a target.
It was hit with DDoS attacks.
Sophisticated denial-of-service attacks, which the founder publicly linked to China, specifically timed to coincide with major protest actions.
So they had to move to even simpler, more distributed technologies.
Yes, they used Apple's AirDrop functionality ingeniously, since AirDrop uses local Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to transfer files directly between devices.
Without conventional cellular or internet networks.
It became a perfect tool for sharing large protest flyers, tactical updates, and images, bypassing both Chinese censorship and conventional network monitoring entirely.
And there was a constant fear of a complete internet cutoff, which the chief executive was reportedly considering. How did they prepare for a digital blackout?
They turned to true mesh networking technology. The app BridgeFi became famous for this. It's a peer-to-peer Bluetooth mesh networking app. Crucially, it lets you transmit messages without any internet connectivity.
Okay, can you explain how that network actually functions?
Think of it like a digital human chain. When two users have BridgeFi installed and are within Bluetooth range, about 100 meters, they can directly exchange messages.
And if they're further apart?
If user A needs to reach user C and user B is between them, user B's phone acts as a relay node, passing the encrypted message along the chain. This distributed, self-healing network is incredibly resilient.
And the download numbers showed they were preparing.
Oh yeah. BridgeFi downloads increased 40-fold in August 2019 alone. It showed incredible foresight in anticipating a complete digital siege.
And finally, the fight for information and visibility spilled over into the most unexpected and frankly cartoonish platform, video games.
Animal Crossing. New Horizons became a surprisingly effective tool for virtual activism. Because physical gatherings were dangerous or prohibited due to the protests and the emerging pandemic,
Activists found refuge and a global platform in the virtual world.
the game allows for extensive customization. Protesters use the custom design feature to adorn their virtual islands with protest artwork, banners reading "Liberate Hong Kong" slogans.
They even imported and displayed photorealistic funeral images of political leaders.
Specifically, Chief Executive Carrie Lam and President Xi Jinping on virtual signs within the game's world.
The deliberate visual contrast there is just fascinating.
It creates a jarring, powerful effect. You have the hyper-cutesy, cartoonish aesthetic of the game, the animal avatars, the gentle escapism,
Juxtaposed sharply with these high-resolution, serious political images.
and the grim protest messages.
Yeah.
This collision of fantasy and harsh political reality was so effective at broadcasting dissent that the game was subsequently removed from sale on the Chinese mainland.
Which basically confirms its utility as a platform for political expression.
It fundamentally proves that in modern networked conflict, the battle for freedom and anonymity is equally waged in informational, digital, and simulated spaces.
This profound adaptability from the protesters, their ability to repurpose flashlights, umbrellas, data, it forced the state to shift the battlefield.
From street tactics to the legal framework, weaponizing intent itself.
They didn't need new laws, they just needed to aggressively reinterpret existing ones. The primary legal instrument used to criminalize this preparedness was the unlawful assembly offense.
Correct. This falls under Section 18 of the Public Order Ordinance. The offense is triggered when 3 or more persons assemble together, act in a disorderly, intimidating, insulting, or provocative manner.
Thereby causing reasonable fear of a breach of peace.
Right. And it's crucial to understand how the courts applied this. It's not just about one person acting out. It's about collective responsibility.
It has a corporate nature.
Exactly. While you need 3 or more people, only those behaving in the prohibited manner are guilty, and the courts must establish a sufficient connection between their conduct to consider them a single unlawful assembly.
So the legal challenge for the state was to prove that a person just carrying a specific object, like a gas mask or a laser pointer, was acting in a disorderly or intimidating manner.
And thereby establishing that necessary connection to the assembly's prohibited actions.
Yeah.
It's a huge legal leap.
And the sentencing principles the courts adopted, they show a clear prioritization of state authority and deterrence over individual rehabilitation.
Absolutely. For serious cases, defined as large-scale assemblies, or those involving perceived serious violence, the sentencing principles dictated that punishment and deterrence were given enormous weight.
And what about factors like the offender's personal circumstances, their age, potential for rehabilitation?
Those were given very little weight, or even disregarded entirely in the most extreme cases. This judicial framework provided the foundation for applying maximum penalties to perceived threats, regardless of the individual's background.
Okay, let's zoom in on the specific case that finalized this paradox of the flashlight as a weapon, the landmark conviction that set the legal precedent.
This was the case involving an unnamed 16-year-old boy. In November 2019, he was the first protester to be convicted specifically for possessing a laser pointer as an offensive weapon.
His appeal was dismissed in May 2020, and he was sentenced to a rehabilitation center.
Correct. And the facts are key here. He had not actually used the laser pointer to attack anyone, had he? He was merely in possession of it.
That's right. The conviction hinged entirely on imputed intent.
The prosecution argued that the teen was wearing protest gear, specifically a helmet, and was present at a location known for clashes. Therefore, they argued, he must have intended to use the laser pointer to inflict harm or discomfort.
So the combination of clothing, location, and possession of a dual-use object was deemed sufficient to prove criminal intent. What did the defense argue?
The defense argued that the teenager was cooperative, merely carrying the pointer in his bag, and that the device had several peaceful, non-criminal uses, like pointing at distant buildings. They were arguing that its potential for harm was overridden by its non-offensive applications.
The appeals judge didn't accept this neutral explanation.
No. The appeals judge definitively dismissed the notion of peaceful protest use as fanciful. The judge stated that in the context of mass confrontations and the need for anonymity, the device's potential for disruption, especially against police observation, was clear.
So the judge explicitly agreed with the prosecution.
Yes. Possession, coupled with contextual factors like protest attire and location, was sufficient to establish the intent to harm, even if the harm was just temporary visual discomfort or sensor disruption.
And the state relied heavily on technical testimony to classify the device as dangerous, moving the argument from legal interpretation to quantifiable physics.
They did. A government expert was brought in to testify about the laser's power. The expert stated that the device could cause harm to the human eye within a specific distance, 36 meters, or about 118 feet.
And that testimony was crucial in transforming the pointer into a credible threat.
Absolutely.
That 36-meter figure sounds highly specific. It was clearly designed to sound terrifying in a courtroom. Let's break down the technical context of that number for the listener, because it's a metric derived from safety standards, not injury likelihood.
That's a great point. That 36-meter measurement almost certainly refers to the nominal ocular hazard distance, or NOHD.
And what is that?
The NOHD is the calculated distance at which the laser beam power drops below the maximum permissible exposure level. It's an administrative safety boundary, and it often incorporates a significant safety factor.
What power level are we likely talking about for a laser with that NOHD?
For a laser to have an NOHD of around 36 meters, it corresponds to a device with roughly 25 milliwatts of power. And this is critical context.
Because typical legally regulated presentation pointers are capped at 1, maybe 5 milliwatts in the U.S.
Exactly. So yes, this was a relatively powerful Class 3R or possibly Class 3B laser, significantly above consumer grade.
But you mentioned the NOHD incorporates a safety factor, so was actual permanent injury likely at 36 meters?
And that's where the legal argument uses technical details selectively. While the NOHD is 36 meters, studies suggest that for a 25 milliwatt beam, a quarter-second exposure, which is roughly the length of the human blink reflex, would only cause the smallest detectable permanent change in the retina at much closer distances.
How much closer?
Maybe 12 meters or less. Beyond that, the chance of measurable physical injury diminishes significantly. The 36-meter figure was used to establish the potential threat radius, a worst-case safety metric.
Not the likely range for actionable criminal injury.
That's it.
So the court accepted this worst-case safety metric as proof of criminal intent, even though actual injury requires prolonged exposure or closer proximity. It seems like they were prosecuting potential physics, not criminal action.
That is the core legal weaponization we are discussing. The legal system took a safety calculation intended to prevent accidental overexposure and repurposed it to define criminal intent.
The laser pointer was redefined as a weapon based on its potential to exceed a safety threshold,
regardless of whether the protester ever had the chance or the will to inflict actual harm.
The lawyer for the convicted teen, James Tall, he immediately grasped the dangerous precedent this set.
He called the conviction profoundly unfair and issued a stark warning that it can also create a precedent of more people being prosecuted for carrying ordinary objects like laser pointers and umbrellas.
And that's the ultimate synthesis of our deep dive. When objects used symbolically or defensively, from zip ties for setting up barricades to gas masks or the umbrella used as an anonymous shield, are redefined as offensive weapons based on mere potential and the context of the protest.
The state effectively criminalizes preparedness.
It fundamentally changes the dynamic of civil disobedience, shifting the focus from deterring actual violence to deterring the mere assembly of tools that might allow you to survive the counter-violence.
Our deep dive into the Hong Kong protests has revealed a movement defined by incredible agility, that be-water ethos, and sophisticated digital countermeasures.
They successfully adapted their gear and their digital footprint to counter a state strategy focused on identification, militarized manhunting, and mass chemical dispersion.
But the state's most definitive victory wasn't achieved on the street with physical force. It was achieved in the courtroom through the legal redefinition of ordinary tools.
By classifying a laser pointer as an offensive weapon based on the imputed intent of the carrier, a teenager wearing a helmet, the legal system turned possession into proof of a crime.
This dramatically elevated the personal stakes of civil disobedience for every single participant.
The ultimate battle was for control over information and definition. Who gets to decide what a flashlight is? A pointer? A toy? A tool for communication?
Or a device that carries a 3-year sentence. The definition was manipulated to serve the state's objective of deterrence.
In a world dominated by hypersurveillance and data, the Hong Kong protests showed that the battle for freedom and anonymity isn't just about what weapons you carry.
But what information you refuse to give up, and what technical definitions you refuse to allow the state to unilaterally impose.
That leaves us with a provocative final thought for you to consider. When a legal system begins to police the mere possession of an object, be it a laser pointer, an umbrella, or a gas mask, based on predicted potential for harm rather than proven or even attempted action,
does the focus irrevocably shift from deterring violence to fundamentally criminalizing preparedness and the right to self-defense against a perceived threat? Think about that next time you look at the mundane objects in your own backpack.